I was watching the Lakers Warriors game a few nights ago, and I just remember one thing that really stood out to me in this game. Well, a few things, but I remember a stat that they put up for guys who have made all NBA defensive teams. Tim Duncan was number one on that list all time at having like 15 all NBA defensive team appearances, the most in NBA history. And then there was like several other guys who had made like 10 or more all NBA defensive teams, such as Scottie Pippen. Definitely deserved by these guys. And then they pointed out how Draymond Green has 8 all NBA defensive team appearances, but wants to get to 10 so he can be on that list with those other guys that were mentioned. A list that's very prestigious, a list I definitely feel that Draymond Green doesn't belong on. I don't think he deserves to be on that list. He's not half as talented as those guys were on the defensive end, the ones that are on that list of making 10 or more NBA defensive team appearances. He's definitely not, but it really does suck now. I would say, in one regard, as a Spurs fan with this Victor injury, it's paved the way for this dumbass to possibly steal a Defensive Player of the Year award that he doesn't deserve. I don't think he deserves it, but this man is campaigning like a motherfucker right now. He's campaigning like a politician going for like a Senate run or presidential run. This guy always campaigns. I've noticed that since day one when he got the spotlight during the Warriors search title run. I just remember never hearing about this mofo and then him just campaigning every day on TV saying, I'm a great defensive player. I'm a great defensive player. I'm a great defensive player. And that kind of put him in the lexicon in the sense that people started getting used to him and then the media started hyping him up. Granted, he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year award that year. Kawhi Leonard got it over him, rightfully so. But it was close. I think he was like in second place. This year, he has a high chance of getting it. And I know some people are going to say you're a hater, but I don't think he deserves it. I look at a guy like Dyson Daniels, what he's doing in Atlanta with the Hawks, in averaging like 3.1 steals per game. I know some people will say like, well, stats don't say it all. Sure, but to me, that's still impressive. 3.1 steals per game in this era, that is hard to do, especially with like the hand checking rules in the sense that they have banned hand checking for the game. So it's harder actually to get steals in this era than the previous era. That's one thing I'll say that is more difficult in today's NBA due to the rules is to get steals. This guy's getting 3.1 steals per game, and he would be the 8th player in NBA history to do that. Think about that. That's a hard feat to accomplish. Not many guys have accomplished it in any era. The last guy to average 3 steals or more per game was, I believe, Alvin Robertson, and he did it in 1991. So we haven't had some guy do this in like 34 years, but this guy's not getting any attention. Draymond stealing that from him. I would say also a guy like Evan Mobley, I feel deserves the Defensive Player of the Year award more than him. He's anchored the Cavs defense and is a huge reason why they have the second best record in the league, number 2 after the OKC Thunder. He deserves it more than Draymond, but he's not going to get that shine. I look at just like the Vegas odds now, and they have Draymond as the sole favorite, and I don't even think he deserves that. Just not just because, quote unquote, I'm a hater. I know some people are going to say like, well, you got to give him credit. The Warriors are winning. Yes, the Warriors are winning, but notice how the Warriors started winning games once they got Jimmy Butler. That was like their steroid injection. I would argue that Draymond's not even the best defensive player on his own team. That would be Jimmy Buckets. And he's benefiting tremendously from playing with Jimmy Butler now. That just gives him more leeway to do more stuff defensively that he wasn't allowed to do before, because Jimmy Butler just gives him more freedom to roam the floor. Jimmy Butler's taking just the more difficult assignments at times on the perimeter. So it's allowed him to even focus more even as a help defender. I think people discount all those things, and they should factor that in there. Just he's getting to play with an elite NBA defensive player and Jimmy Butler next to him. So that's one of the main reasons I think he should be discounted. But I also think another reason that Draymond Green should be discounted from this award is that he's a reflection of just how the rules have changed, in the sense that he gets to play by like 90s NBA rules when I watch this man play. He gets to do hand checking, grabbing, and holding while other guys are not allowed to do that. And it's horseshit. It's complete horseshit. I say this as a guy who loved the 90s and the 2000s when they allowed you to do that. That it's not fair that Draymond gets to do that while everybody else doesn't. The refs always allow him to do that. They give him the leeway to do it. And I figured it out why they do it, because the league, Adam Silver allows this shit to happen because the Warriors are viewed as a cash cow. Curry's viewed as a cash cow. So they view Draymond as like an important accessory to like the Curry Warrior machine, which is why they're allowing him to get away with that shit and not calling him on that. And that also aids in this defense tremendously. It makes him a much better defensive player compared to a lot of other people simply because he's allowed to grab, foul, and hack versus other guys aren't. Imagine if the top NBA defensive players on other teams are allowed to do the same thing. You would see these guys being even better than Draymond, but they're not allowed to do that. But he's allowed to play by those rules, but no one else does. So I always feel he's an unfair advantage. That's why I don't respect him. I actually wish they would allow everybody to play the style of defense that Draymond plays, because that used to be common in the 90s. Everybody was allowed to play that way. And I feel if everybody was allowed to play that way, Draymond would not get any shine. Other guys would overshine him because they're just naturally more talented than him. You allow them to have the same toolkit as Draymond, it blows Draymond out of the water. That's the reality of the situation. But he definitely benefits from that favoritism, the league bias towards him to get away with those tactics. But to me, it's also a sign of how the NBA has declined tremendously in that regard, that they don't allow guys to play that style of defense, only Draymond. But notice when Draymond's allowed to play it, how many guys struggle against it. And I always hear this stuff from the younger crowd, like, well, today's players are better. And I've always disagreed with that, because I've always said that if these players had to face the hand checking rules, the dirty Howard fouls, that they wouldn't be that good. They would be less successful, but they don't have to deal with it on a nightly basis. But notice when they had to play Draymond, the struggles that they face because he's allowed to play that old defensive style. So you see that. That's always been my argument. Like, hey, if these guys are so great today, let's go back to the old rules. And then I'll hear from the young crowd like, no, we can't go back. We can't go back. The game must evolve. I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that the game must evolve? If these players have evolved, then they should be able to play with these old rules and show us how great their evolution is. That's always my comeback to that. But that's the dirty truth of the NBA. The players are less talented today in large degree because they don't have to play by these old rules. And when they do have to face the old rules, quote unquote, Draymond being allowed to play by them, they struggle. Like we saw that with Luka Doncic the other night. Like just when Draymond started hacking him, just there's not much he could do about it. Just he was pretty much donezo, as they would say, when it came to that. But in another way, I would say Draymond shows just how today's NBA players are weak, is because I look at a guy like Draymond. He has the unfortunate label of being this tough guy, this enforcer, and whatnot, but I don't view him as a real tough guy. I just feel the NBA is filled with a bunch of weak guys who are scared of him. They fold up when they see him, and to me, it's pathetic. But just I just look at it during the previous eras when I look at how the NBA used to be different when it came to dealing with someone like Draymond, that he would have been taken out by now. Like think about it. Just think about this. Draymond has played like I think 14 or 15 years, and he's never been hit once in the face. He's never taken one punch, despite doing all the dirty things he's done. He's punched out dudes. He's kicked guys in the nuts a bunch of times. And you would think that would have resulted in him getting his face broken by now, or there would have been some sort of retaliation, that something would have happened. But no, he's escaped playing 14, 15 years of his career without getting punched once in the face. The closest thing to him ever getting hit was Tristan Thompson shoving a basketball in his face, which was pretty funny during the NBA Finals several years ago. And if you watch that clip, it's hysterical because you see Tristan shove the ball in his face. Draymond tries to play it off by laughing it up at first, but he can't hide his disgust and he gets angry and starts yelling like a maniac. That to me always gave me a window of how Draymond would feel if someone actually threw a real punch at him. I don't think he would be able to take it well. I think he would lose his mind. I think he would go crazy. But unfortunately, we've never gotten to see it. I just remember even back in the old days, enforcers like Charles Oakley, even they got hit. Even they got a few punches. They may have won all their fights, but they had to deal with some blows in their face. And to me, it's just funny how Draymond's never dealt with that retribution. He's never had to deal with retaliation. Like, I remember as a kid when Karl Malone laid out Isaiah Thomas. Go watch that clip. It was a very dirty play, just busted up Isaiah Thomas's face. Karl Malone had a wrestler's body. It was intentional, dirty play. Isaiah had to get like plastic surgery to repair his face. That's how bad that hit was. And, it was dirty, but no one felt bad for Isaiah because he was also a very dirty player. But what was interesting about that was later on when the Pistons played the Jazz later on that season, they took out a retaliation hit on Karl Malone. They did a very dirty foul in which they leveled him to the ground. He was knocked down the ground in some pain. And what was interesting, Malone didn't bother to respond back. I think after the game, he said something like, well, I hope this feud between me and them is over. They got what they wanted, and I saw no point of just going back at them. I just don't want to have this endless fight with them, and I just want to be done with it. But to me, that's like one of the best examples of how that era was different, that if you took a hit on somebody, there was always retaliation. There was always going to be retaliation, whether it happened in that game or the next time you faced that team. You were going to deal with it. You were going to deal with it from either the player you assaulted or from one of his teammates, that there was always a message being sent. And I felt Draymond has been very lucky in his career that he didn't play in that era, because he would have gotten retaliation thrown on him a bunch of times. But in this era, there is no retaliation. Think about what he did to Sabonis a few years ago in the playoffs. He stomped on his chest, broke some chest bone or something. I remember reading at the time that he had broken a bone in his chest, I believe, and that type of bone usually doesn't get broken unless you're in a car accident. That to me was absurd. But no retaliation by the Sacramento Kings against him. He ran his mouth. He came after Sabonis. He taunted him. Back in the previous eras, you wouldn't even dare do that shit. You knew that they were going to come after you like a mob, that you were going to be like a dead man walking back then if you had the audacity to talk shit after hurting a player, that his teammates were going to come for your head, and that there would be retribution and blood on your hands for that, essentially. But you had to worry about that. And that to me is just a reflection of how weak the current NBA is, that you don't see any of these guys retaliating against what he does. Like, I look at what he did to Gobert, just choking him from the back, choking him out, and just Gobert not retaliating, which I thought he should have, because Draymond has bullied him for years. He's made fun of him. He's mocked him. And then on top of that, just choking him out. And afterwards, he still taunts him. He still talks trash. Back then, if you did that to a player, you're not going to get away with it. They're going to clock you out. They're going to come after you. They're not going to let you get away with bullying them and just clowning them like that. Because back then, you even had pressure from your teammates to fight back. Back then, Gobert's teammates would have been like, hey, what are you doing, man? Why are you letting this man punk you? You got to do something about it. You can't just keep taking this abuse from this guy. You got to go for his head. Like, we will back you up, but you need to go for it. You can't take this abuse. That used to be always the case. I remember Karl Malone telling the story when Shaq leveled Ostertag, I believe. I think he slapped him during a preseason game, and Karl Malone straight up told Greg Ostertag, like, hey, man, you need to fight him back. You need to get him back. Like, I have your back. You take the hit on him, and we'll all jump in on him for you also. But you got to do something about it. Ostertag refused to do that, and Malone looked at him as a softie, and the rest of his teammates looked at him as a soft guy. They lost some respect for him. So that's how it was back then. I just feel today's players are really weak in that regard, that they're not willing to fight back. And on top of that, I felt like back during the era I grew up in the 90s, the early 2000s, that every team had an enforcer back then. Just even the worst teams had enforcers that Draymond would have had to answer to them back then, and so there would have been no easy game where he could get away with cheap shots essentially and not have to worry about retaliation or dealing with it. So I just think he's definitely a reflection of how weak this era is when I think about it, because there's like nobody in the current NBA I feel that can really mess him up, that would be willing to retaliate against him. Like there might be like a few, maybe Isaiah Stewart. I could see busting him up if he ever did some cheap stuff to Isaiah Stewart, like what he did to Nurkic or what he did to Sabonis. I think he probably would retaliate against Draymond. I remember Jared Allen accidentally kicking him in the nuts once and Draymond being angry, and the next game trying to retaliate on Jared Allen. I think this happened a year or two ago, and Allen just gave Draymond like a push to the shoulders, kind of signaling to him like, hey, don't even think about it. And Draymond backed away. But that showed to me again that Draymond is a pussycat, that he will back down immediately once he knows he can't win a fight. But very few guys are willing to confront him, willing to step to him. So that to me is just a reflection. The league is filled with a bunch of softies, and he's definitely benefited from it, because in the previous eras, this guy would have been a bench warmer. He would have had a great dental plan because he would have needed it after how many times like his mouth would have been busted open. Just he's a reflection of a declining league. I think just he benefited tremendously from the current era. I just think in the previous era, the 90s, 00s, bench warmer, like I said, probably doesn't even make it to the league. Probably playing overseas, probably is a Shanghai Shark or a Guangdong Tiger. Just that's the way I look at it. But yeah, that's all I have to say. It's a long rant, but I feel like just he's a reflection of just the decay of the NBA, the weakness of the players in the NBA, the reflection of how most of the NBA just doesn't have a spine when it comes to dealing with this clown. So yeah, it would have been interesting if he was in the previous era. I just remember just the wars Charles Oakley had with the Davis brothers from the Pacers, and how they would always go back and forth, where they would take cheap shots at each other every single game. I just would have loved to see Draymond Green having to deal with the Davis brothers or just Charles Oakley in a playoff series. How fun that would have been. I think he would have melted. I think he would have cried and begged for mercy. Just even dealing with a guy like P.J. Brown, Anthony Mason, just a guy like J.R. Reed from back in the day. I think he would have gotten his face busted. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Just a long rant.